I caught my cheating wife at a party at her boss's hotel. When she saw me, her face fell, despair took over every feature, and for a few seconds she froze, as if the world had stopped. I continued to stand still, motionless, watching every step of the act that she masterfully rehearsed, the fake smile, the way she came to me with that "I can explain" look, the trembling fingers touching my arm as if she still had some right over my body. But what she didn't know, what she didn't even suspect, was that I had already been aware of what she had been doing for months. I already knew about the dinners that ended too late, the casual meetings that never matched the cold messages she sent me in the middle of the night. I already knew about the masculine perfume that she tried to disguise with incense. I already knew about the calls she ended abruptly when I entered the room. I knew, because I stopped being stupid when I stopped being blind. And there, at that ridiculous party, surrounded by glasses of champagne and fake laughter, I carried a divorce letter in the inside pocket of my jacket that was ready to be delivered. What I didn't know, what hit me like a knife in the throat, was seeing our daughter there, standing in the background, eyes wide, not knowing whether to look at me or her mother. She was with a friend, it seemed, and perhaps she didn't even know that this would be the night that the image of family she had known up until that point would be destroyed forever. I saw her freeze, as I myself froze months ago, when I began to suspect everything. And in that instant, what was anger turned into silent despair. What was hate became a pain that scratched from the inside out. Because that's what betrayal is. It's not just sex with someone else, it's not just a hidden kiss or a lie told with conviction. Betrayal is when love dies and you are the last to be warned. She tried to laugh, she tried to engage me in her memorized speech that it wasn't what it seemed, that we were just talking, that she didn't want things to go this way, and her every word felt like she was tearing up the marriage license right in front of me. But I remained silent. And she noticed that something had changed in me. She knew she was no longer dealing with the same man who left the house with flowers thinking she was still at work. It was no longer the same as waiting for her to sleep to cry in silence, blaming himself for not being good enough. I wasn't that fool anymore. And then she started to panic. His hand shook, his voice broke, sweat ran down his made-up forehead. He tried to pull me into the corner, he tried to make me get out of there. But I remained. I wanted her to feel the exposure, the shame, the taste of her own farce in front of all her colleagues. Because that's how she had made me feel. And at that moment, just that night, she would taste the poison she had made me swallow for months. The lover? A nothing. A visibly married man too, who disappeared as soon as he noticed the commotion. He didn't look at me, he didn't try to justify himself. He left, a coward, like every traitor who knows he doesn't love, he just enjoys. And she was left alone, in the middle of the party, surrounded by looks, whispers and cell phone cameras that began to capture more than expected. From then on, her reputation began to crumble. But what hurt the most, what tore at my chest in a way that not even 1,000 fires could heal, was when my daughter looked at me with her eyes full of tears and said, "Dad, since when did you know?" And that's when I understood the real crime my wife committed. Because she didn't just destroy a marriage. She destroyed the image of trust that a daughter had from her own mother. She destroyed innocence, reverence. And from that moment on, what was a couple's fight became a generational hole. From then on, my daughter moved away from her mother as if she had died. I didn't want to see her, I didn't want to talk to her, I didn't respect her anymore. And as much as it brought me some kind of sense of justice, the pain of seeing my daughter suffer inside was greater than any revenge I could devise. Over the next few days, she tried everything. He showed up at the house with flowers and letters, he cried, he begged, he knelt down. He tried to use the argument of time, family, reconstruction. But none of that touched me anymore. Something in me had broken beyond repair. I had been loyal until the last second. Not her. And when trust goes away, love can't stay. The process was quick. The divorce letter was delivered by hand. She cried. He cried sobbing. He said he never imagined I would have the courage. That I was always the peacemaker, the silent one, the one who forgave everything. But even the quietest man has a scream trapped in his chest, and mine echoed in that signature. And then the worst came for her. The daughter refused to see her. He said he didn't want to call her mom anymore. She said she lost respect, that she no longer knew who she was. And that, yes, was the real punishment. It wasn't me who destroyed the bridge between them. She did it alone, with every lie told, every unexplained absence, every masculine perfume on her clothes, every smile hidden on her cell phone. I just walked away, with the dignity she tried to take away from me. The funny thing is that, after that, she started chasing me. He said he wanted to rebuild, that he loved me, that the other part meant nothing. But do you know what the problem is with letting yourself be corrupted? It's just that you never come back in one piece. She was now a divided, cracked woman, with a recent past that prevented her from walking. She wanted to start over with me, but forgot that I had already started moving in another direction. Months later, I met someone. Without looking. Without forcing. Someone who saw my scars and didn't try to erase them, just embrace them. Someone who made me laugh again. That made me sleep without chest pain. That made coffee in the morning that tasted like peace. And then I realized that sometimes pain is just a bridge. A bridge to the other side. And on the other side there is no forgiveness, there is freedom. But what really sealed everything was when my ex-wife, already without strength, already tired of trying, called me to talk. We sat on the same bench where we used to take our little daughter to play. She was thin, haggard, with no sparkle in her eyes. He apologized and said he wanted to at least recover the friendship. Who knew he had lost me forever? And it was at that moment that I understood that some betrayals don't just end with marriages. They destroy souls. But there's something she never knew. Something that happened at that same party, at that same moment when everything fell apart. Something I kept to myself, and that she would never discover until it was too late. What happened at that moment? What was it that she didn't see, but that would change everything forever? Welcome to the channel. Here, we do not support and will never romanticize any type of betrayal. All stories are fictitious, but based on situations real and possible, with the sole purpose of showing how infidelity destroys lives, families and souls. Let them serve as reflection, not inspiration. Now get ready, because what you're going to hear is strong, painful and unforgettable. Take a deep breath. The story will begin. Lucas and Emily met on a random afternoon, one of those that go unnoticed by so many, but that for some reason Mark lives forever. He was late for a meeting, she had missed her painting class, and the two of them ended up standing in the same small, unassuming cafe, sharing a line, a relaxed phrase, and a look that lasted a little longer than necessary. From that first meeting until the wedding, it was 2 intense years, full of discoveries, promises, trips and conversations until the dawn. Lucas was a civil engineer, methodical, rational and kind. He had a sense of responsibility that sometimes prevented him from relaxing but made him trustworthy. Emily, on the other hand, was expansive, creative, passionate about art, spontaneous to a fault, with an almost poetic ease in transforming ordinary days into special moments. He was the type of person who danced in the living room without music, who cried watching TV commercials and who said, "I love you," like he was breathing. The beginning of their life together was everything they imagined. They lived in a simple but cozy 2-story house, with walls covered in paintings she had painted and shelves full of Lucas's technical books. Mornings were made up of brewed coffee and quick kisses before work, nights of old movies and cheap wine. For a while, it seemed like they were living out the script of a love that nothing could destroy. Their families got along well, their friends admired them, and together they built what they seemed to call the future. It was easy to love them as a couple, she, with her infectious laugh, he, with his protective manner. Each brought to the other what they lacked, and the two found balance in the difference. Over time, natural challenges emerged. Emily struggled to maintain financial stability with her painting studio, while Lucas faced pressure at work, tight deadlines and sleepless nights. Leisure moments became scarcer, but the two maintained the habit of having dinner together, even if in silence, even if exhausted. There was respect. There was companionship. And there was still love, although now more contained, more silent. Neither of them were the type to give up easily. They argued little, but they always talked. Sometimes they looked like two shipwreck survivors trying to keep the boat afloat with their bare hands. Still, there was no shortage of gestures. Lucas continued to leave notes on the fridge with simple phrases like, "Good luck at the exhibition," and Emily lovingly organized Sunday lunches, even when he seemed distant. The birth of Ava, their only daughter, was the highest point in their history. Emily transformed herself as a mother, dedicated, attentive, loving. Lucas, even though he was absorbed in his work, never stopped putting his daughter to sleep whenever he could, reading the same children's books with the same intonation every night, even after long days. Ava grew up surrounded by affection, her mother's sensitivity and her father's firmness. The relationship between the three of them was something Emily used to call, "our perfect little world." In everyone's eyes, it really seemed to be. The framed photos in the living room showed a family that smiled sincerely. On birthdays, Lucas prepared videos with images of his daughter throughout the year. At Christmas, Emily decorated the house as if every detail told a story. On the outside, everything followed the serene course of a well-structured life. Recently, Lucas had been promoted and became a partner in an engineering company, which required more travel and social commitments. It was common for him to return late, with deep circles under his eyes and a rumpled shirt. Emily, in turn, began to expand her artistic career with increasingly popular exhibitions. One of her paintings had recently won an award, which left her euphoric for days. She began to be invited to cultural events, dinners, meetings with curators and sponsors. Lucas was happy for her, but sometimes he felt out of place in that world of artists and speeches that he didn't understand. It was as if they were living in parallel universes, touching lives that ran in opposite directions, but always trying to meet each other halfway. Emily said he needed to relax, enjoy himself more, and Lucas asked her not to forget her roots. There was a mutual effort, but the rhythm became increasingly uneven. Time, subtle and merciless, installed silence where there was once conversation, tiredness where there was once desire. They still slept together, but they rarely touched. They still laughed, but over old jokes. Declarations became dates on the calendar, surprises became rare. Ava was now a teenager, and her presence filled the house with a new energy, but it also imposed a new kind of distance between the couple. Emily's attention was almost exclusively focused on her daughter and her career, while Lucas sank deeper and deeper into work. Sundays were warm, marked by routines that seemed more like obligations than pleasures. And although neither of them said it out loud, they both knew that something had changed. Still, they continued. By Ava. For the years shared. For the story they had built. For a kind of love that, although different, still felt alive. On some nights, lying in silence, Lucas would look at the ceiling and try to understand at what point they stopped being us and became her and me. Emily, on the other hand, sometimes watched him sleep and wondered if there was still room between them for a new beginning. Neither of them wanted to give up. But they also no longer knew how to insist. Despite the distance, there were moments when affection was revealed. A rainy afternoon watching an old movie. An impromptu dinner on a Tuesday. An unexpected message saying, "I miss you." Fragments that seemed to promise reconstruction, even if fragile. Emily still wore the perfume he liked best, and Lucas kept a photo of the three of them in a photo frame in his office. Small details that held an invisible link, like someone who doesn't want to let go, but also doesn't know how to hold on anymore. Life took its course. Emily was invited to curate an exhibition at an important hotel, linked to a partner company of her new boss. The invitation included an opening cocktail, and she threw herself into it with enthusiasm. Lucas, in turn, was called on a last-minute trip by the company, an international project that could open new doors. They were excited about their achievements, even if they no longer shared everything like they used to. Ava, between studies and social media, followed her parents with the attentive and silent gaze of someone who understands much more than meets the eye. She noticed the hugs becoming more and more formal, the conversations becoming faster and faster. I noticed the effort, but also the fatigue. However, none of them talked about it. After all, talking was making space for what they didn't want to face. And so, between dinners, meetings, exhibitions and appointments, they continued like two travelers sharing the same track, but in different carriages. That particular night, at the cocktail party at the hotel, Emily was radiant. She had spent the whole day involved in preparations, chose an elegant dress, had professional makeup done. I was excited about the guests, the possibilities, the recognition. Lucas, tired from the trip, decided to surprise her. He arrived at the event unannounced, with the intention of honoring his wife. I wanted to show that I was still there, present, trying, even if I no longer knew how. In his jacket pocket he carried something that had been ripening for weeks, a letter. Not out of impulse, but out of clarity. He didn't want to fight. He wanted to respectfully end what had been, for so long, the center of his life. But before he delivered the letter, before calling his name, something happened. Something that would forever change everyone's trajectory. Something that wasn't in the plans, that was out of control. A vision that froze the steps, that made the heart race, that ignited a pain as old as it was recent. An unexpected presence. A misinterpreted gesture. An exchanged look. And then, within seconds, everything that was contained began to silently crumble. And what Lucas saw that night not only confirmed what he already felt, but also launched him into a new understanding of what had been built and what, perhaps, had never really existed. What he would do from there would not just be about the end of a marriage. It would be about finding yourself again, about emotional justice, about liberation. And in the midst of all this, there was a detail that no one predicted. A detail that would make the fall even more devastating for those who least expected it. But this detail had not yet been revealed. That night, Lucas calmly parked the car, as if every extra second before entering the hotel was a chance to reorganize his thoughts. He had returned from his trip early, left his luggage in the car and taken a quick shower at a strategic stop just to avoid looking exhausted. He didn't tell Emily. He thought about sending a message, but decided against it. I wanted to surprise her, I wanted to see her face when I found him there, in the middle of the event she was so looking forward to. He was proud of her, despite everything. I admired his dedication, his effort to grow in such a competitive artistic environment. Even though I felt like there was a gulf forming between them, I didn't want it to seem like I was rooting against it. On the contrary, I wanted to show support. And more than that, he needed that gesture for himself. A gesture of farewell, even if she didn't know it yet. The letter envelope was folded in two, stored carefully in the inside pocket of the blazer. That was a night he would never forget, but not for the reasons he thought when he crossed the hotel entrance. The lobby was packed, elegantly dressed people milling around with glasses of sparkling wine and practiced smiles. There was instrumental music in the background, waiters passing discreetly among the guests and framed paintings lit to perfection. Lucas remained on the sidelines, observing everything in silence. His gaze searched for Emily, but also lingered on the details. In the bright colors of the works, in the conversations that were lost in the air, in the discreet flashes of cell phone cameras capturing moments for social media. He advanced slowly, recognizing faces she had mentioned before. People from her world. People who, lately, seemed to know more about her life than he did. And then he saw her, beaming, smiling at someone out of sight. She wore a dark dress that highlighted her silhouette, and her hair was tied up in an elegant bun, with a few loose strands that fell deliberately over her face. She seemed secure, confident, completely surrendered to her surroundings. Lucas felt a tightness in his chest. That was the woman he had fallen in love with, and for a moment, he wished to go back in time, just to relive the days when she smiled like that when she saw him arrive. He took a few steps forward, but stopped when he saw her touch the arm of an approaching man. A simple gesture, but too intimate to be casual. The man was tall, dressed in a precisely cut suit, with the appearance of someone who knew exactly what effect he was having. Emily leaned in slightly, said something Lucas didn't hear, and they both laughed. It wasn't the laugh that bothered him, but the way she looked at him. A look that Lucas knew, a sparkle in the eyes that had once been his. He stood there, still, with the envelope still in his pocket, trying to understand if that was what he was seeing or if his mind, shaped by the distance and distrust of the last few months, was inventing something that didn't exist. But the sequence of gestures that followed left no doubt. His hand slid down her back naturally, and she didn't flinch. On the contrary, he leaned in more, as if looking for that contact. Time stopped. The surrounding sound disappeared. Lucas felt the world spin in slow motion. The heart, previously tight, now beat wildly, as if it wanted to escape from the chest. Every muscle in his body felt paralyzed, and yet his feet instinctively carried him backwards. He walked towards the side corridor, escaping the looks, the commotion, the image that insisted on repeating itself in his mind. He stopped in front of a mirror at the end of the hallway and stared at his own reflection. He was pale, his pupils were dilated, his eyes were watery. He ran his hands over his face hard, trying to wake up, as if it could all be a nightmare. But it wasn't. That was the naked, raw and cold reality. He stayed there for a few minutes, processing, trying to understand what he felt. It wasn't just anger. It was humiliation. It was a loss. It was the end of a chapter that he refused to believe had been written with such indifference. He tried to maintain his composure, he remembered Ava, he remembered everything that still needed to be done. He returned to the room slowly, keeping his distance, but observing. Emily was now talking to other people, but the man was still nearby, always attentive, always present. And there was no discomfort between them. There was a familiarity that only those who share something intimate can convey. Lucas then saw Ava, in the other corner of the room, next to a friend. The daughter seemed restless, her eyes lost. When she saw him, her eyes widened. He waved discreetly, and she ran towards him, almost tripping over the low heels she was wearing. The hug they gave was silent, tight, full of meanings. She knew. Lucas didn't need to ask. In his daughter's eyes there was guilt, sadness and a silent question that he could not answer. She whispered that she wanted to leave, but he said not yet. I needed to resolve something. I needed to see how far this would go. I needed to face it head on. And then they separated, with a kiss on the top of her head and a silence that cut more than any words. The night went on as if nothing had happened. Emily, in her bubble, continued to parade among the guests, collecting compliments, offering smiles and distributing calculated looks. At no point did he look for Lucas. At no point did she seem to wonder if he had come. This hurt more than the image he witnessed. Because the absence of expectations reveals a lot about what someone still expects from you. And she, there, seemed to have said goodbye a long time ago. The envelope in his pocket was now heavy. But Lucas hasn't taken it off yet. I needed to wait for the right moment. Not to make a scene. Not to get revenge. But to make sure I delivered that letter without regret. And that moment would come faster than he imagined. Near the end of the event, an announcement was made. Special thanks to the team involved in producing the exhibition, the sponsors, the artists and the curators. Emily was called to the center, applauded. He took to the stage with ease, thanked them with a smile, mentioned names and gestures of support. And among her thanks, she discreetly included the name of the man with whom she had been seen earlier, as being an important mentor in this project. The mention caused several eyes to turn to him, and he reciprocated with a subtle wave. Lucas felt his hands sweat. The time between them, the respect built, the sleepless nights, everything seemed small in front of that scene. It was as if he had been replaced in the middle of a tribute ceremony, and no one knew he existed. After the ceremony, Emily was walking towards the bar when she finally saw him. The shock on his face was immediate. He stopped abruptly, his eyes widened, and for a moment, he hesitated. But she recovered too quickly for someone who should have been surprised. She walked towards him with a wobbly smile, the same one she used when she wanted to make amends for a mistake. I said something like, "You came," and tried to touch him on the arm, but he backed away. The coldness in his gaze was enough for her to understand that it wasn't just an unexpected visit. She tried to hide it, change the subject, ask about Ava, talk about the exhibition. But Lucas didn't respond. He just took the envelope out of his pocket and handed it over in silence. Emily took it, confused, and before she could open it, he said quietly, "Read it at home. Don't ruin your night." And then he walked away, leaving her there, with the envelope in her hands and her face falling. She followed him with her gaze, not knowing what to do. For the first time in a long time, I felt lost. As he walked away, Ava approached her mother, watching her with a mix of disappointment and pain. Emily tried to hug her, but her daughter backed away. The distance between the two was like an invisible knife. The young woman said just one sentence, almost without a voice, before walking away, "Now I know who you really are." And in that moment, Emily lost more than her husband. He lost something that he may never be able to rebuild. That night, many truths were told in silence. Many ties were cut with looks. And an open wound began to bleed without anyone realizing the real extent of the damage. What Lucas saw and heard at that event was just the surface. There was something much deeper behind that betrayal. Something that had not yet been revealed. Something that would change everything again. And it was about to emerge. Emily couldn't sleep that night. The house was silent, but inside, everything was screaming. The envelope rested on the living room table, still closed, as if its mere presence was enough to poison the air. She walked in circles, restless, as if anything was better than facing those words. He grabbed a glass of wine, tried listening to music, but nothing helped. The image of her daughter walking away, cold, hard, weighed more than any look. It was as if Ava had stuck a mirror in front of her, forcing her to see the woman she had become. When he finally worked up the courage, he opened the envelope with shaking hands. He read each line with his heart pounding, but it wasn't the content that destroyed it, it was the elegant coldness with which Luke wrote it. No attacks, no harsh words, just an impeccable sequence of fantasies, ignored feelings, accumulated disappointments. Each word carried the weight of goodbye from someone who tried for so long. And that was precisely what tore him apart, knowing that he had left without screaming. In the morning, the house seemed even emptier. Lucas hadn't slept there, and Ava hadn't come down for breakfast. Emily set the table anyway, trying to maintain some semblance of normalcy. But it was all a facade. Life as I knew it had changed, and the following days would only confirm this. She tried to call her husband, sent messages that were ignored. He called his daughter, but the phone just kept ringing until it went to voicemail. The loneliness was now no longer disguised, it was a scream between the rooms. In the days that followed, the previously busy schedule became unbearable. Meetings with friends, meetings with curators, everything lost meaning. Because no achievement could sustain the emptiness I felt inside. It wasn't just the loss of her husband. It was the daughter's contempt, the absence of her eyes around the house, the silence where before there were questions, complaints, smiles. Emily tried to understand how everything had gotten to this point. I tried, but I couldn't. It was only 2 weeks later that Lucas agreed to meet with her. They made an appointment in a discreet restaurant, far from people they knew. She arrived early and waited anxiously. When he entered, his face was serene but distant. He had an expression of someone who had already overcome some of the pain. Emily, on the other hand, was destroyed. His face bore the marks of sleepless nights and a regret that he could no longer hide. He said he wanted to talk, that he needed to explain. But Lucas calmly interrupted her, saying that there was nothing to be explained, that everything she had to say had already been said in her actions. Emily insisted, and that's when he agreed to listen. She talked about the exposure, about how she had felt alive again, and about how her involvement with that man had happened like a slow accident, like a stupid escape from routine. Lucas listened carefully, but without interrupting. When she finished, he just said he expected that. Which I already knew. That I no longer felt anger, just relief. Because sometimes you need to see the truth up close to finally free yourself from doubt. Emily started crying right there, saying that losing his trust was the worst punishment possible, but that she couldn't bear to be away from her daughter. He asked to see Ava, to try and make it right. Lucas hesitated for a few seconds, then said something she didn't expect. He said that Ava had figured it all out before him. That his daughter already knew about his involvement, not because he had told her, but because she had seen it herself. And it wasn't just once. Emily widened her eyes, trying to understand. Lucas then said that Ava had witnessed meetings, read messages left open on her mother's laptop, heard conversations in the next room. But he kept everything to himself, in an attempt to preserve what was left. Emily brought her hands to her face in shock. He never imagined his daughter would know. He never imagined that that coldness in his eyes wasn't from recent judgment, but from accumulated disappointment. Lucas said that Ava had told him everything on the day of the event, moments before he entered the room. That the pain she felt didn't come from the betrayal itself, but from watching her mother lie while pretending to love and integrity. Emily begged to speak to her daughter, to have a chance to explain herself. Lucas, still calm, said he couldn't force Ava to forgive. That time might heal, but that moment was hers. Emily tried to justify herself, saying that she never stopped loving her daughter, that everything she did was for them. Lucas just lowered his eyes, murmuring that loving someone means protecting them, not betraying their trust. The silence that followed was deafening. After a few minutes, he got up, left the payment on the table and said that she needed to get on with her life, but not to expect everything to go back to normal. When saying goodbye, he let it slip that the story wasn't over yet. And that there was something she still didn't know. Something that would change everything. It was the next morning that the bomb fell. Emily received a call from Ava's school. The secretary asked her to come to the school for a meeting. He didn't go into details, just said it was urgent. Emily ran over, her heart racing. Upon arrival, she was received with some tension by the coordinators. They asked her to wait in a private room. A few minutes later, Lucas entered, also called by management. They both looked at each other without understanding, but without hostility. When the director entered the room with a serious expression, the atmosphere changed. He closed the door, sat down in front of the two and started saying that a video was circulating among the students, and that it involved Ava. Emily's eyes widened, immediately wanting to know what it was about. The director hesitated before showing the content on a tablet. It was the recording of the party at the hotel. Someone had discreetly filmed the moment in which Emily exchanged caresses with the man in question, and the video had been posted by a fake profile, with the caption, "The curator and the boss, art in movement." The video quickly went viral among students, and Ava, upon finding out, fainted at school. She had to be taken to the infirmary and refused to leave. Emily began to cry, desperate. Lucas got up at the same time and demanded to speak to his daughter. They were led to the infirmary wing, where Ava sat on a gurney, her eyes red, her head bowed. When he saw his parents, he turned his face away. Emily approached, tried to touch her daughter's hand, but Ava jerked her away, with a look of contained fury. He said he didn't want to hear anything else. That didn't need explanations. That I had already seen everything I needed to. Emily, between sobs, begged her to listen to her. She said she was sorry, that she would do anything. But Ava looked at her with a hardness Emily had never seen. And then, with a choked voice, he said that this wasn't just about betrayal. It was about pride. About seeing your own mother's face going viral in embarrassing videos. It was about the whispers in the hallways, the muffled laughter, the looks of pity. It was about having her mother exposed as a vulgar woman, in the eyes of everyone, while she herself tried to survive adolescence. Emily fell to her knees. Lucas watched in silence, trying to contain his emotion. Ava then looked at her father, and with tears falling, said that she wanted to leave, that she wanted to get away from everything for a while. Lucas nodded. He said he would take care of her. Emily tried to stop him, but he was firm. He said it was better for now. That she needed time to understand her own actions. That every choice has a price. And that the price of that betrayal was still being charged. As they walked away, Emily was left alone in the schoolroom. The sound of the door closing behind them was like a verdict. She stayed there, kneeling on the cold floor, staring into space. The mind echoing the only sentence Ava had said with complete clarity, "You are no longer my reference. You are my trauma." And there was still more to come. Because not everything had been revealed yet. Not everything had been exposed. And what was left was about to change the course of that story forever. Emily remained in that room for almost an hour, sitting in the same spot, with her legs folded under her and her gaze lost somewhere between the wall and the floor. The air was thick, the sounds around her seemed muffled, and the only living thing there was the pain pulsing inside her. She knew that something inside her daughter had broken, something that could never be rebuilt. But he couldn't move, he didn't know what to do with his body, with his mind, with that guilt that was taking root in a cruel way. When she finally got up, she was dazed, her face swollen, her eyes heavy. He walked through the school parking lot like someone crossing a minefield, with hesitant steps, trying to balance between regret and denial. He got into the car without knowing where to go, he started the engine on impulse, but left it running for several minutes without moving the car. His world, the one he believed he had under control, had collapsed in a matter of days. And she knew that she had not yet reached the bottom of the abyss. Something told him, between the lines of what Lucas had said in the restaurant, that there was more. And the uncertainty of what was yet to come gnawed at his sanity. Meanwhile, Ava and Lucas arrived at his newly rented apartment. It was a smaller, simple, functional space, with a few boxes still scattered across the floor. Ava didn't say anything on the way, and Lucas respected her silence. He prepared some tea, left it on the bedside table and left the room without saying a word. He just closed the door carefully, like someone closing a wound that was still open. He sat on the sofa in the living room and spent long minutes staring into space. I was tired, but my mind wouldn't stop. His daughter's face replayed in his memory like a looping movie, but there was something else, information he hadn't yet shared. He kept that as an asset that, although he didn't want to use it, perhaps it was necessary. Because what he had discovered went beyond betrayal, beyond scandal. It was a hidden truth that could change everything again, and just keeping it made him feel complicit in something dark. The next day, Lucas received a call that confirmed his suspicions. A friend at the company, who also worked in the auditing area, had discreetly investigated the connection between the man Emily had gotten involved with and the hotel's cultural project. The result of the investigation was dirtier than Lucas imagined. Not only was this man married, something that Emily perhaps ignored, but he was also involved in a favoritism scheme within the hotel chain where the exposure had taken place. Fictitious sponsorships, illegal transfers, contracts signed on behalf of third parties. And more than that, there was a recurring name in the documents, Emily. Her bank account had received large deposits under the justification of curatorial services, but the amounts did not match the actual budget for the event. Lucas didn't know to what extent she was involved or if she had been manipulated. But the records were there, and if they came to light, they could ruin her, not just socially, but legally. Overcome by anguish, Lucas decided to confront her. He called Emily and asked them to meet, but this time in a neutral location. It was made in a public library, in a reserved and discreet space. When she arrived, she looked more haggard than ever. He was wearing loose clothes, his hair was tied up in any way, and his eyes carried a tiredness that not even time could cure. They sat facing each other, and he got straight to the point. He said he knew everything. That he had proof, documents, bank statements. Emily's eyes widened, first in shock, then in panic. He tried to deny it, he tried to justify it, he said that he had signed papers without reading them properly, that he trusted his boss, that he thought it was all part of the sponsorship. Lucas firmly interrupted her, saying that that type of argument no longer worked. That she wasn't naive. He knew very well what he was getting into. Emily then began to cry desperately, saying that she had been pressured, that her involvement with the man had started precisely for that reason, for fear of losing the opportunities that were finally appearing for her. She said he made her feel alive, important, but he also used her. That made her sign documents, that said that this was normal in the corporate world, that she didn't need to worry. Lucas heard everything in silence. When she finished, he said something that shattered what little she had left inside her. She said that the disappointment with the betrayal was great, but that nothing compared to the fact that she had put her own daughter at risk out of ambition. He said that she had allowed Ava to be involved in a scandal that could now become a police case. And if she thought there was still a way to erase all of this with apologies, she was wrong. Emily asked for help, said she would do everything to get rid of it, that she would cooperate, that she would return the money, that she would hand over the man's name. Lucas nodded, but before leaving, he threw the last blow. He said that he had already forwarded the information to a lawyer, who would not take any action for now, but that he needed to protect Ava. And that if Emily tried to manipulate or omit any detail, he would put everything in the hands of justice. She tried to argue, but he had already gotten up. He left her there, with her hands shaking and her face covered in tears, with the certainty that she had crossed a line from which there would be no return. The next day, Lucas took Ava to spend a few days with her grandparents. I wanted her to breathe, to have time to compose herself. Meanwhile, he met with his lawyer to understand the legal implications of Emily's involvement. They needed to decide what to do with the documents. There was enough evidence to open a case. But there was also the possibility of using them as a bargaining chip, if Emily agreed to collaborate with the investigations and definitively move away from the curatorship and the company involved. Lucas didn't want revenge, he wanted security. I wanted to make sure Ava wasn't exposed anymore. Emily, in turn, sent a handwritten letter to her daughter. He didn't ask for forgiveness, he just explained. He told his version, his fears, his choices, whether wrong or not. He said he understood the separation, that he didn't expect anything, but that he loved her. Ava read it but didn't respond. The hurt was still greater than the compassion. And at that moment, silence was his only defense. It was at this point in the story that something unexpected happened. The man Emily had gotten involved with was arrested in an operation to embezzle public funds. The news made the front page of newspapers. His face plastered on websites and in the news. Emily was named as one of the project's collaborators, and although her name was not at the center of the investigation, the connection was evident. Lucas received dozens of messages, colleagues wanting to know if it was true, if his ex-wife was involved. He responded elegantly, saying only that he would let justice decide. Emily, in turn, collapsed. She began to be removed from projects, friends disappeared, her image was damaged almost irreversibly. And, ironically, it was Lucas who helped her. He appointed a trustworthy lawyer, paid part of the fees, and ensured that she had someone to turn to. Not for her. But for Ava. Because, despite everything, Emily was still a mother. And he knew that his daughter would never get over seeing her mother being dragged publicly without any support network. Time passed. Months followed. Ava began to regain her smile little by little. He went out with friends again and resumed his studies more lightly. Lucas met a woman in a coffee shop, coincidence or irony of fate, a psychologist who, curiously, listened to him more than tried to fix him. They began to go out discreetly, and he, for the first time, allowed himself to think about starting over. Emily, now living with her sister, was trying to get back on her feet. She still struggled with administrative processes, but stayed away from the media. Every now and then he sent messages to Ava, who responded for the first time with a simple sentence, "I hope you're doing well." For Emily, this was more than an answer. It was the first crack in the wall of ice between them. And maybe, just maybe, it was the start of something different. Not back to what it was, but an attempt at redemption. And it was like this, between ruins and possibilities, that the characters in that story began to write new chapters. Because some pains don't go away, but they teach. And some losses are not the end, they are just the exact point where you begin to truly live. Lucas's decision to help Emily, even after everything that had happened, was received with surprise by some and with silent criticism by others, but it was not about forgiving or forgetting, much less about reconnecting any broken bond. It was, above all, a conscious choice to not allow hatred to shape his character. There was a fine line between justice and revenge, and he had seen up close how pain could contaminate everything when it turned into a thirst for punishment. Emily was dealing with the consequences of her own actions, and he didn't want to be another burden that pushed her deeper. She had already been exposed, humiliated, and abandoned by almost everyone who fawned over her before. What was left for him now was to face the rubble of his own life with the clarity of someone who could no longer escape the choices he had made. And Lucas, by extending some form of legal aid to her, acted for Ava. Because the biggest dilemma now was protecting his daughter without further fueling the trauma she was carrying. Ava, little by little, recovered. The emotional scar was still there, but it didn't hurt like it used to. Her father's constant presence and the space he gave her to deal with everything in her own time were fundamental. She discreetly attended therapy sessions, wrote texts that she didn't show to anyone, and had reconnected with an old friend who helped her breathe outside the scandal bubble. Deep down, Ava knew her mother was trying to make things right, but she still couldn't look at her without reliving the feeling of having been betrayed twice, once through adultery, once through exposure. The video was still circulating in small groups maliciously, and although the subject had lost momentum, the marks remained. And what weighed most was knowing that everything could have been avoided if there had been more self-love and less neediness disguised as passion. Emily had left town temporarily. She was living with her sister in a nearby city, where no one recognized her and where she could, little by little, rebuild herself away from accusing eyes. He had started teaching painting classes at a neighborhood school, something he did without pay at first, just as a way to keep his mind busy. The kids didn't judge her, they didn't see her as a newspaper headline or a social media villain. They saw only a kind woman, with tired eyes and a soft voice, who taught patiently. It was there, faced with the innocence of the little ones, that Emily began to understand the gravity of everything she had done. She no longer saw herself as a victim of manipulation or as someone deceived by empty promises. He began to see that his mistake was not just having given in to betrayal, but having done so with the awareness that he was putting at risk everything he said he loved most. Her biggest mistake was allowing vanity to speak louder than responsibility, allowing the lack of recognition to nullify her role as a mother. This realization, although late, was what began his real process of change. Lucas was also going through changes. His relationship with the woman he met at the cafe evolved slowly, but with a silent intensity that brought him comfort. She listened to him attentively, didn't pressure him, didn't invade his silences. She wasn't a replacement, and he never tried to make her into that. It was, in fact, a new chapter written in another language, with less dramatic and more real words. She met Ava naturally, respecting the teenager's limits, without invading spaces or forcing bonds. The two talked about films, books, even music, and little by little, distrust gave way to light complicity. There was no rush to build a new family, but there was space for it to happen. Lucas didn't say anything bad about Emily. When the subject arose, he treated it neutrally, as if he knew that the greatest punishment is to live with what one has done, and that the true reckoning does not take place in the courts, but in the inner corridors of conscience. Even so, the open wound between Emily and Ava was an unresolved point. Until one day, an unexpected invitation arrived. The school where Emily taught was having a children's art exhibit and needed volunteers to help set it up. One of the coordinators, who also knew Ava from other times, told Lucas about the event. When he mentioned this to his daughter, she hesitated. There was something in his expression that spoke more than words. He didn't respond immediately, just asked for time. A few days later, he decided to go. He said he wanted to see for himself whether his mother was really changing or just putting on an act once again. Lucas just nodded. She knew that this step needed to be taken by her, not by interference. On the day of the exhibition, Ava entered the school with a discreet coat, tied-up hair, and a look that mixed vigilance with expectation. He walked through the corridors decorated with colorful posters, naive drawings and phrases written with marker. As he approached the main room, he heard Emily's voice, soft, explaining to a child how to use a sponge to paint with more texture. She watched from a distance, unnoticed, and for the first time saw her mother completely unarmed. There was no makeup, there was no pose, there was no audience. Just a simple woman, with eyes marked by difficult nights, leaning in front of a child who enthusiastically showed her a drawing. Ava entered the room, and Emily saw her. For a second, he froze. The brush fell from his hand, and his eyes filled with tears. But it didn't move. Ava slowly walked over to one of the paintings and observed it in silence. It was a portrait made by one of the students, a woman smiling next to a girl, both holding paintbrushes. On the footer, it was written, "This is the teacher and the daughter she loves very much." Without looking at her mother, Ava said the drawing was beautiful. Emily whispered that she thought so too. The silence that followed was unlike any other. It was no longer an abyss, but an interval. Ava turned to her and said that she still couldn't forget everything, but that she was trying to understand. Emily just cried. He didn't get closer, he didn't try to touch, he just accepted it. Because now I knew that forgiveness is not a gift you demand. It is something that, when it comes, is by merit, not by appeal. And there, in that room full of color, where past and future collided in abstract shapes, a bridge began to be built. Outside, Lucas was waiting in the car. I knew something important was happening in there. When Ava came out, her eyes were red, but her face had a less heavy expression. He got in the car, buckled up and just said he wanted ice cream. Lucas smiled lightly and drove to the ice cream shop. I wouldn't ask more than I should. I had already learned that the greatest answers come when there is space for silence. Emily, that night, sat alone in the small room of her sister's house, holding a note left by one of the students. On it, there was a rough drawing of her with wings on her back and a heart on her chest. The written phrase was, "You have the face of an angel, but with the eyes of someone who cried a lot." She smiled through tears. For the first time in a long time, he felt useful. Not as an artist, not as a woman, but as someone who could, in some way, start over. And meanwhile, in another corner of the city, Lucas opened an album of old photos with Ava. His new girlfriend watched from afar, without interfering. There was a new type of love being built there, not the overwhelming kind, but the kind that rises on ruins, that accepts flaws, that values the truth. Life would never be the same again. But maybe, just maybe, it could be even better. Because now there were more conscious choices, scars that taught, and a story that, despite being painful, could still teach something to everyone involved. And what was yet to come would bring not an end, but a meaning. Life found a new rhythm for everyone. It wasn't a fresh start like in the movies, where everything magically comes together in a sunset or a final hug. It was something more real, more dense, where each step required confrontation and each silence carried memories that could not be erased. The relationship between Ava and Emily continued to be marked by a tense delicacy, like someone walking on glass, but with each encounter, with each small conversation, the crack seemed less sharp. Emily no longer demanded closeness, she didn't ask for promises, she just waited, present, without pressure, offering presence with respect. The daughter, little by little, began to allow crumbs of closeness, a gentler exchange of messages, a silent coffee, a memory shared with caution. Emily understood that her role, now, was to conquer space with humility, without the selfish desire to erase the past. He knew he had lost the right to want everything back, but he didn't give up on deserving, at least, a safe place next to his daughter. Lucas, on the other hand, was experiencing the beginning of a new phase with his feet grounded in reality. His relationship with Anna, the psychologist he met by chance, evolved naturally, with a mature connection and no jokes. He didn't look to her for salvation, and she didn't see herself as the healer of anyone's wounds. They respected each other, listened to each other, laughed at nonsense, shared silences. Ava accepted her with surprising naturalness, perhaps because Anna never tried to occupy a space that wasn't hers. The new routine with her brought Lucas a peace that he didn't even remember what it was like. It was a serene love, which didn't need to be proven all the time, and which blossomed without haste, without masks. For the first time in a long time, he found himself walking towards something light, without the weight of rescuing what was destroyed, but with the lightness of building something new, with the rubble that remained of what once was. Emily, after months away, was called to give new testimony in the case of her ex-lover, now convicted of corruption and money laundering crimes. His involvement, although real, was classified as supporting. Helping with the investigations and handing over all the documentation, she had eased the weight of the accusation, and she ended up signing a plea deal that prevented her from holding public office or managing projects financed by private companies for a few years. The sentence was harsh but fair. And more than the legal consequence, what marked her was the symbolism. She lost not only her reputation as an artist, but also the privilege of being considered someone trustworthy. Starting over would be difficult, and Emily knew it. She moved permanently to another city and accepted a position as an assistant teacher at a community school. She spent her days painting with children, gluing colored paper to cardboard, teaching shapes and colors, and in the late afternoons, she sat alone in the schoolyard, watching the sky change color like someone looking for meaning where before there was only emptiness. It was a silent solitude, but now she inhabited it without running away, without transferring blame. There was a strange kind of peace about it. There was pain, but there was also something like regret transformed into maturity. Ava completed her senior year of high school with exemplary grades. He chose to study abroad, in another city, with a partial scholarship at a university that offered a program aimed at young people in the process of overcoming emotions. In his entrance essay, he wrote about trust. About how trust is not something that is lost all at once, but little by little, in small daily cracks. And about how, sometimes, rebuilding it is not a matter of forgetting, but of giving new meaning. Lucas read that essay before she sent it and cried silently, with pride and pain intertwined in his chest. When it was approved, they celebrated together with a simple dinner. Emily found out the news via text and, in response, sent a message, "I'm very proud of you, daughter." Ava didn't respond, but she didn't delete the message, and that was enough for Emily to smile to herself, with teary eyes. The last meeting between Emily and Lucas took place months later, on a cloudy afternoon, when Ava went to spend the last weekend at home before moving. She asked the two to meet for a talk. Not knowing what to expect, they accepted. The reunion took place in the old cafe where Lucas and Emily used to go when they were just two young people dreaming of a life together. They sat at the same table as always, in silence. Emily seemed more serene, with hair that was now gray at the ends and a calmer, less distressed look. Lucas watched her for a few moments before saying that the coffee still smelled like the past. She smiled, not in joy, but in painful recognition. They said few words. She was grateful for everything, not just for helping with the processes, but for not destroying her image in front of her daughter. Lucas said he didn't do it for her. He did it for him, for Ava, for everything he still needed to feel. He said that harboring hatred was like drinking poison waiting for the other person to die, and he no longer had room for that within himself. Emily nodded, her tears contained. Before they said goodbye, Lucas said he wanted her to find peace. And for a brief moment she believed it could be possible. Ava left with teary eyes, but a lighter heart. Lucas took her to the bus station, helped her with her bags and waited until the last second. She hugged him tight, like when she was a child, and whispered that he had been everything. That she would never forget his strength, the way he knew how to love her even on the days when she couldn't smile. Lucas held back crying, but his eyes betrayed his emotion. When the bus left, he remained there for a few minutes, looking at the road, as if watching time pass before his eyes. On the way back, he stopped at the coffee shop where he met Anna. He bought 2 coffees to go and went to the park where she used to walk. He found her sitting on a bench, reading. When he saw him, he smiled in that serene way that won him over. He sat down next to her, handed her the coffee and remained silent for a few moments before saying that, for the first time, he felt like he could start something without carrying emotional rubble on his back. Anna held his hand firmly and said she would wait as long as it took. And in that simple gesture, Lucas knew he was exactly where he was supposed to be. Emily, that night, walked to the school square where she taught. She carried a small wooden box, which contained old brushes, pieces of ribbon and some letters written by herself, but never sent. He dug a hole under the oldest tree in the area and buried the box there. Not as a romantic metaphor, but as a symbolic gesture. I didn't want to carry that anymore. It was time to let the weight of guilt rest elsewhere. As he stood up, he felt the wind touch his face and, for the first time, he took a deep breath without feeling his chest tighten. I didn't know what the future would bring, but I was willing to live it with the truth as my only companion. And so, everyone went their own way. Different, marked, but not defeated. Because, in the end, the greatest redemption did not come through recovered love, nor through immediate forgiveness. It came from confrontation. To look in the mirror and recognize your own flaws, without excuses. To accept that, sometimes, life needs to fall apart to teach how to build something that no longer depends on appearances. That betrayal doesn't just destroy relationships, but entire parts of who we are, and that rebuilding takes time, courage and a daily dose of truth. None of them emerged unscathed. But everyone left transformed. Now, I want to hear from you. What did you think of this story? Which character touched you the most? What decision would you have made in their place? Leave your opinion in the comments, because it is very important to us. And of course, if you liked this story, subscribe to the channel right now so you don't miss the next impactful scripts we are preparing. Here, the truth is always the center of our stories. And remember, this channel does not support, encourage or romanticize any type of betrayal. Our objective is to show, through fiction, the real consequences that unfair attitudes bring to everyone involved. Until the next story. And be careful what you hide, one day, everything will come to light.